So I want to welcome everybody to this next interview series. Partner organization is the Utilities Technology Council, and they are an important partner. We signed a partnership last year with them. And, you know, the definition of utilities is a simple one. It's always there. The water always turns on. The oil always flows, so I get gasoline in my car, if that's the kind of car I have. The electric grid still works, the lights work, and so forth. And the Utilities Technology Council represents all of those and other utilities that must be on all the time. And as I learned in working with them, wireless is a real important part of their operation. So I'm going to introduce briefly Karnel Thomas, who is the Senior VP for the Utilities Telecommunications Council, and Ron Taylor, who is a former board chair of UTC, and also Scott Jones from DX Engineering is going to assist me when we get to the half hour and we start opening it up for audience questions. Scott will vet those and forward those to either Karnel or Ron. I want to remind you all, please keep your microphones muted until we get to the question and answer part, and then you can enter the question in chat, please. So without further ado, Karnel, you want to kick us off and give us a brief background on yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Thank you for having Ron and I, and thank you for giving UTC the platform to speak to your membership. My name is Karnel Thomas. I'm the Senior Vice President of Membership and Meetings for UTC. I've been with the organization since 1991, and my first role at UTC was a frequency coordinator. So I've been enjoying my time with the association. After my military service, I was a former Marine. And I'll stop there, and I'll turn the floor over to my esteemed co-host, Mr. Ron Taylor, to share his background. Ron?
Okay, hi, thanks, Karnel, and thank you all for letting us be here tonight. Appreciate it. I'm Ron Taylor. I graduated from Arizona State University in 1974 with a BSEE, and I immediately went right across the street about a mile to Salt River Project. That's a power and water utility here in Arizona. My specialty in school was in power, and I thought that sounded like a good place to go. I soon discovered that power wasn't all that interesting to me because, as I like to say, the frequency never changes. It's always 60 hertz. But the truth was, I think I preferred to work with megahertz and watts instead of hertz and megawatts. Sound a lot safer. I worked in communications engineering area of the Salt River Project for my whole career, over 42 years, and I had responsibilities in two-way radio, microwave, wireless, supervisor control and data acquisition, fiber optics, and lots more. I got involved with UTC in 1975, and I was actually a frequency coordinator, volunteer at the state and regional level at the time. I ended up in UTC a long time. As you indicated, John, I was chairman of the board in the 2015-16 year, and then I retired immediately after that from SRP. So my wife and I own a small pecan farm here where we live in Arizona, and managing that and all my hobbies like amateur radio and model airplanes and stuff is keeping me busy in retirement. But thanks again for having us. Look forward to this.
Well, you're both welcome, and thank you for that introduction. Before I go any further, I'll just make one comment. I am moderating this panel because most of you are used to seeing Tim Duffy in this position. Tim Duffy, who was a president emeritus from the Radio Club of America, asked if he could step down for a while. And I really want to thank Tim for 2 years of every month doing an interview with us and moderating it. He did an excellent job. I will not fill his shoes very well, but I'll do the best I can. But I really want to thank Tim for his service for the past 2 years in doing this. So thank you, Tim. Okay, so a little bit about the history of the Utilities Technology Council and what UTC provides to its members? Maybe one of you can start us off on that, please.
I'll take that, John. First of all, thank you. First of all, I would like the audience to know that UTC membership are member companies or organizations. The organizations join the association, and all of the employees of the organization can then in turn take advantage of the member benefits. And I'll talk about those in just a moment. UTC is a full service global trade association focused on the intersection between technology and critical utility members' critical infrastructure. We give a voice to the men and women who create and maintain the communication system that keeps the lights on, water running, and the gas flowing. In 2023, UTC will celebrate its 75th anniversary, our Diamond Jubilee. We're really excited about that. We'll have our annual 75th anniversary annual conference in Fort Lauderdale, and followed by gala, the 75th anniversary gala that'll happen in Baltimore. UTC is led by Cheryl Riggs. We have a staff of about 20 people. And late last year, the UTC Board of Directors approved the strategic plan for the next 3 years, 2022 to through 2024. And during that time, they amended our mission statement. Our new mission statement reads, UTC and its members shape the future of utilities to deploy technologies and solutions that deliver secure, reliable, and affordable services. Our new vision statement reads, UTC drives innovation, foster collaboration, influence public policy for utilities and other critical infrastructure. Our member benefits range from advocacy, education, webinars, forums, in-person meetings, virtual meetings, hybrid meetings. We provide frequency coordination, and we'll talk about frequency coordination as we move through here. We have committee and division focused on technical issues as well as other relevant issues associated with the industry, and national and regional and social media networking amongst peers, and a leadership development program. So we're really excited about opening the opportunities that UTC provides to its membership. A little history about the association. We at UTC organically grew out of the FCC. In 1942, then Commissioner J.L. Fly requested the creation of a technical planning board to manage spectrum allocations and frequency coordination after World War II. Utilities had started using radio technology in the 1930s. So you can imagine with all these different industries using radio frequency, the interference problems and things of that nature that occurred. The Radio Technical Board was manned by subdivided into panels and committees. UTC was the power utility industry was part of Panel 13, Committee Number 4. And the Committee Number 4 housed the power utilities, expanded to include gas, electric, water, and at the time, steam organizations. In 1944, the Radio Technical Board was disbanded, and the utility members decided to stay together, and they formed their own organization called the National Committee for Utility Radio, which is the forerunner to UTC. And that organization was divided into 10 regions. UTC still has 10 regional division, and each one of the regions had frequency coordinators. So I'm going to pause here and let Ron talk a little bit about what regional frequency coordinators did at that time. Ron, can I turn to you?
Yeah, sure, Karnel. Well, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was a brand new engineer about a year into the company, and my boss was involved with UTC, and he said, hey, we need a frequency coordinator for the state of Arizona, and it didn't sound like a big deal. I had a couple of loose leaf 3-ring binders about that thick, and one page was a frequency, and every line on the page was one of the users of that frequency and where they were, coordinates and all that. And I got to learn very quickly the geography of Arizona. There was about 80 utilities of the kinds described by Karnel on there. And we allocated all of this spectrum in the VHF and UHF spectrum for radio, basically is what it was. We didn't do microwave. And all by hand and all by just gut knowledge. I learned pretty quickly by doing one bad coordination once that VHF could go 200 miles here in Arizona with no problem at all if they were on the correct mountaintops. And so don't let anybody tell you that you're safe 75 or 25 or 45 miles away. It depends on the geography. But that's what we did. And I was doing just the state of Arizona for Region 10. So I would send my recommendations over to the Region 10 coordinator person, and he would submit it to the FCC and get it sent back to the applicants, and went from there. It was fun. Met a lot of people and learned a lot about the mountains in Arizona.
Yeah, and Ron, thank you. And I have to say, Ron was one of my mentors when I first joined UTC and did frequency coordination. Some of you may remember the 574 form. That's what I was using at the time to do coordination. But we progressed. There's the ULS system and the 601 form that they're using now. But in 1957, just to get back to the history of UTC, in 1957, NCUR, the National Committee of Utility Radio, started having our regional coordinators meet with the FCC to continue to talk about technology, frequency, data, signal propagation, and things of that nature to try to minimize harmful interference. 1968 was a very pivotal year for UTC. In 1968, the FCC gave UTC its designation as an official frequency coordinator. They were very complimentary to our volunteer coordinators in previous years, and said that we laid the foundation for some of the rules and regulation that we're currently using in spectrum allocation today. In 1968, UTC also changed its name to Utility Telecommunication Council, UTC. Since that time, there's been different iterations of UTC and what the letter stood for, but we've always retained the UTC moniker. And just moving from there, in 1987, UTC voted to centralize its coordination operations. Instead of having 10 individual regions coordinated, all was now centralized to one area. And in 1988, we moved to Washington, D.C., and the coordinators all worked out of one area in Washington, D.C. And then in 1999, we opened a membership to include technology partners such as the Motorola's, the Ericssons, the Tate, and other radio manufacturers. And in 2017, we moved our offices to Arlington, Virginia. So that's a quick snapshot about who we are, where we are, how we got here, and our long, robust, and rich history with the FCC and spectrum allocation.
Well, that was great, Jens. That was quite informative. I want to touch a couple of points that were made. Karnel told us earlier that his members are actually companies, and that's in distinction to, for example, RCA, where we have individuals as members. However, we do extend a handout to any UTC member company employees who want to join RCA. That's quite easy to do. And you can go on our website and find out about that. But other than that difference between us, there's actually a lot of synergy, which is why I was excited a year ago to sign a partnership. We're both focused on educating people in the technologies that they need. We're both focused on younger people and youth and trying to get them into these basically STEM-based jobs and industries. So there's an awful lot of things that we have in common. And I think going forward over the years, we'll continue to work together between our organizations to foster that. So I wanted to ask another question. What are some of the challenges that you both see in the utilities industry? What's troubling your member companies? And it doesn't have to be communications oriented, it's things in general.
I can take that, Karnel,
Yep.
first. I think one of the biggest challenges, John, that I say we, I've been out of the industry for 6 years, but we, the industry, are facing today would be in regard to renewable energy resources, wind and solar specifically, some of the good and the bad and the ugly of that stuff. If you're remembering what happened in Texas a winter or so ago, if you have a lot of that resource in there, you have to be very, very careful on controlling it and the rest of your system and all of your power acquisitions from other areas in order to basically keep the lights on. To do that now, we need, well, I'd say immediate, accurate telemetry and control, SCADA information from all these resources and the ability to control them, to respond instantly in their sudden disappearances. And to do that, and from the telecom perspective, most of the wind farms here in Arizona are up in the northeast quadrant of our state. That's where the wind blows when it blows. And most of the solar farms are down here in the southern third of the state. A few of them are fortunately located near some of the fossil plants where we have access to broadband communications already. Some of these things are way out in the hinterlands and require whatever we can get to them in order to get good control capabilities. That might be anything from a very narrow band VHF or UHF link of some kind up to and including broadband fixed microwave up to 150 megabits per second. If some of those sites are big enough that they are manned, you have the issue of all the IT needs for the people, all the computers and internet access and things. So it's an interesting challenge, but you know, even some of the rooftop solar stuff that's around, when there's lots and lots of it now, some of that is actually being monitored, not really controlled. That's the owner's business, but monitored for what it is doing from instant to instant. So the challenges then inside the telecom sector of the utility industry now is a big one. Karnel mentioned the power radio service frequencies, and I talked about it too, that I helped coordinate many years ago. All of those frequencies, all that spectrum just fell right into the business industrial pool back in about '87 when UTC fortunately became one of the recognized coordinators of that thing. But that meant we were sharing it with everybody. It was all real busy and full already, and that pretty much made things very difficult. Sharing is good. The more you have to share, the better, but we have another issue with all the spectrum that we use. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the cellular industry is very good about making more of that go away. Back when I first started, if we wanted a good, long, reliable microwave path, we did it at 2 gigahertz. Remember those frequencies?
Yeah.
1.8, 1.9 gigahertz. And one day that turned into PCS, so people could have more cell phones. And so we all moved up to the 6 to 7 gigahertz, 6 to 7 gigahertz range. And that was okay. It was not full at the time, but we helped fill up a lot of that. And then as time moved on, it's become basically completely allocated in some markets. It's hard to imagine, you know, with real narrow beam antennas and power control and all kinds of fancy things, it's not a pencil beam. It's still got side loads. You still have to be careful. And here in Arizona, we don't have a lot of, like out on the plains where they got 1,000-foot towers, and you put them wherever they want.
Biden for Build Back Better and some of this Inflation Reduction Act. Every single Democrat.
Excuse me.
Can
Can everybody mute? Charles Fensky, can you please mute? Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Instead of having 1,000-foot towers that we could put anywhere and get away from interference, we're all co-located on mountaintops here in Arizona and many states. So you concentrate all of the uses in one area like that, and then you get into metro areas and it's completely used up too. So we were forced basically to go on up higher to the 10 and 11 gigahertz spectrum for long haul, again, intended to be very reliable microwave paths. These things, by our own standards, had to maintain very close, if we could, 5 nines or 99.999% reliability. We discovered pretty fast that we had to cut the path lengths in half, double the number of sites and all the costs and everything in order to get somewhere close to that reliability. Not only that, because it's right at the edge of the rain fade phenomenon at 11 gig, we had to use all kinds of countermeasures and especially space diversity and hitless switching, data combining, and dynamic resource allocations and that sort of thing, just to make the path work for us. So these things are very interesting. It's what kept my job very interesting for 42 years. It never it never got old, but it can get expensive along with that interest, for sure. UTC does continue to address our spectrum availability issues for utility critical communications needs. I personally got to meet with the FCC on occasion or two, and they weren't real supportive. One guy, when we were done talking, patted me on the back and said, "Ron, if there was anything I could do for you, we would." But they're selling spectrum to the highest bidder, and utilities couldn't really compete with all that. That's about all I had on challenges, John. If you got any questions or want to expound on that, let me know.
Okay.
Ron, can I just add to that? The other big challenge I think we all can adhere to is workforce development. With the aging workforce and things of that nature, finding talent to come in and address some of the issues that Ron mentioned is a key challenge for the industry, as many industry. I'm sure we all heard about the Great Resignation and things of that nature. UTC is continuing to be on the forefront of workforce development and DEI and those issues in the industry because we need manpower, and that's the best way I can say it. So with that being said, John, I turn the floor back to you, sir. Thank you.
Sure. And of course, that's one of the synergies that we have between our organizations is the desire to develop younger people and youth and get them into STEM industries, because that's the future. A lot of us are graying out. I certainly am. And we need to get those younger people. So let's talk specifically about wireless. Ron and Karnel, you both talked about wireless, but how specifically does wireless help your industry and your member companies?
Well, I can give you some specific ways that it's used and why it's important from that respect. In fact, if you were to ask me why is wireless important, it's because even today in 2022, the wires still don't go everywhere that we need to have communications network connectivity. Wireless is the only way to get there in many cases, but you know, and I'm speaking from my own experiences there, but very high on the list would be for two-way dispatch radio. Contrary to what TV says, the police don't use cell phones to talk to each other, and we don't either in the utility industry. I mean, of course, there's some of that going on, but dispatch radio is very, very important just because of, if you say, crowd knowledge. If a troubleshooter is in trouble in the field, he can call the dispatch and ask for some help, but his buddy a mile away can hear that call and be there before dispatch even has a chance to get a hold of him. If they had to hang up the phone and dial around till they found somebody close, you can imagine the time waste on something like that. Dispatch radio and safety go hand in hand in this business. But another thing used for wireless in the utility industry, let's look at one of our sister utilities, the gas pipeline industry. They have pipelines stretched clear across many states in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the best they can do for gaining access for getting telemetry on pressures and flow rates and things is radio. Maybe even simple as a VHF simplex link off a mountaintop 150 miles away. But they have that ability. As they are closer to other resources, they can lease wireless services from the wireless companies if their mission allows for whatever reliabilities they can get with such a thing. But the 900 megahertz ISM band has been used for a lot of that kind of stuff too. In fact, we use so much of it. I felt like it was getting overused. If you look at the noise spectrum on an analyzer, it was getting up to the threshold of the detection on the radios in some locations. We had a few that actually quit working because of just too much, too crowded on the band. In our business, on the water side, we had a lot of SCADA and telemetry functions as well for the canal control networks. We were fortunate to license several channels of the MAS, multiple address system channels, in the 900 megahertz spectrum years ago, and still use that to do the canal controls and the pump, deep well pump controls and so forth. And some of those sites are moving over to fiber optics as we speak, and also onto the private field area network that I'll talk about in a minute. Some companies, just like the pipeline companies, some of the electric companies are still using like a UHF link from a mountaintop down to a substation in the middle of nowhere to do all of their SCADA control, and even some of their telephone links and things. Sometimes that's the best way to get it. There may not be a microwave path. It might have a grazing path that works okay at UHF, but there's not direct line of sight. I mentioned the field area network. That's something that some utilities are getting into, and my utility was just starting that when I retired. I was able to help find some spectrum before I left, and did a little bit of the initial work on the plans for the network. But we were able to purchase for an unannounced amount of money here, but a piece of spectrum. It was 1 megahertz up, 1 megahertz down bandwidth at the 700 megahertz spectrum. It turns out it was initially called a guard band. we know why, but the FCC allocated it for use, and the company bought it all up in a speculation thing and then started selling it off. We purchased the Phoenix metro area. And when you do that, you buy it as based on the population. So it's dollars per pop or whatever to purchase the spectrum, or megahertz pop, I mean. So it can get pricey, but the plan for that was to have it's not broadband at that kind of a spectrum bandwidth, but it's wideband and wide area networking with lots of cellular type site construction. So to control all the thousands and thousands of small endpoints that are transformers and distribution switches and things that were manually controlled before, you can automate that stuff if you have communications with it, and keep your customer outages down to minutes or seconds, as opposed to hours for somebody to drive out there and throw a switch. It's far from complete. It's one of those jobs that's never ending, I'm sure, but the guys are doing a good job at it. I've kept up with them a little bit at lunches to see how they're doing with it. So it's those kinds of things. Wireless is very, very important. My company managed to put fiber optics cable into all of the 69 kV distribution substations with rings everywhere, and used a lot of Sonnet and then other systems after that. And all of that is good. It's very, very reliable. But once you step out of that substation, you're going from hundreds of points to thousands and tens of thousands of points. You don't do that. And if we literally had to go to a house and monitor every solar panel, it would be millions. And part of the system is already being diverted to rescuing some of the meter reading system that was having trouble with the ISM 900 megahertz band. That system is over 1 million meters, electric meters. Anyway, that's it. It's very challenging, but that's also that's why it's very important to utilities, John.
Thank you. Karnel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Ron nailed it in a nutshell. The only thing I'd add is that we're seeing an uptick in interest in satellite technology being used in some areas. Seeing that some of the more rural areas, as well as some of the urban areas, to read meters and things of that nature. So it's just expanding that the need for wireless operations and controlling critical infrastructure networks is still relevant and still a big part of it. So UTC, and we have the different committees that are focused on wireless and trying to stay abreast of the latest technology to make sure our members are informed and can have strategies that can take advantage of some of the new technologies being introduced to the marketplace.
Well, you just gave me a nice segue into something that I was going to say in a moment, but I'm going to say it now. So at our annual event, our technical symposium and RCA banquet in Atlanta on Saturday, the 19th of November, and hopefully we'll get somebody from UTC to attend. Our guest speaker at the dinner is in fact going to be another partner organization that we partner with, which is the executive director of the Space and Satellite Professionals International. And that organization also, like utilities, has stated to me multiple times that you can't throw anything into space without having wireless to control it and monitor it and telemeter it. So we're going to have the opportunity to hear from the space side, and whoever attends from UTC will give you a chance to talk to the SSPI executive director, Robert Bell. So another question is your frequency licensing services. I was intrigued to find out that you not only do the RF stuff, but you also, I believe, still do power line carrier.
That is correct.
And there's a whole long story, which I won't bore you with, but somebody in my family actually pioneered some of that technology in the 30s. So tell us about your frequency licensing services and who it's available to and how it all works.
Yeah, as Ron said, that now that we're part of business radio, we can UTC can coordinate for any type of organization, entity at all. So we do a full service frequency coordination. We do frequency searches. We do engineering studies. We do propagation models. All of the information that's necessary to submit the 601 form to the FCC to secure a radio license. A lot of it is with the utility industry, which we were granted in 1968. But we have turnkey services. I provided John with a list of reference links so we can share that with the community so they can log in and see all the different services we offer. But as a former frequency coordinator and Ron too, it's actually been the most intriguing part of my job, learning about the needs and dependency on wireless technology for energy delivery to the general public for their consumption. It's been fascinating. Also, another one of the benefits that we provide on the frequency spectrum services is Frequency Sentry and Frequency Guard, where we monitor your radio licenses to let you know when they're due to expire. We also monitor frequencies to both the adjacent channels as well as the channel for any potential harmful interference. And we provide reports to different folks on that. But we are a full service frequency coordinator from soup to nuts. So if anyone's interested in utilizing our service and learning more, please feel free to contact me. And again, John will provide you with links to the different areas on the UTC website.
Yes, I will show those links towards the very end of the event, Karnel. Thank you. So before we get into questions from the audience, and we've got several now, I just want to remind everybody of a couple of things. We have a number of programs going on that interest various groups of our members. We've started a Wireless Women series, and the next event is on Thursday, the 22nd of September, which is next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, moderated by Ellen O'Hara, who is a former CEO and chairperson in the land mobile radio industry. We are starting a mentoring program, and I believe that actually UTC has something very similar, and we kicked that off about 2 months ago. So those of you that are members and are interested in mentoring a younger person earlier in their career, please contact Amy at the website, and we'll see if we can get a match for you. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to Scott. Scott, you want to start throwing some questions at Karnel and Ron? Gently, please.
Absolutely. And Karnel and Ron, that was very interesting. Having been in the telecom industry for 3 decades or more, and doing microwave path design, it's fascinating. Anyway, brings back a lot of good memories. Are long-haul power companies using their transmission right-of-way to lay aerial fiber to replace microwave links?
What was the first part? Are all utilities you said?
Are
or-
long-haul power companies using their transmission right-of-way to lay aerial fiber to replace microwave links?
Yes, they are. And a large percentage of it is a very unique kind of fiber cable. It's not underbuilt, sag, plastic made stuff. It's the overhead ground wire. It has optical cables inside of it. So the big lightning arrest, the lightning rod, the top wires on the transmission lines are carrying multiple fibers and lots of those lines. There's issues if you hang a plastic coated fiber cable, standard underbuilt cable underneath 500 kV line, it might fall apart from electrostatic field breaks down the insulation and stuff, and water gets in and then it falls apart. So
Yeah.
yes, to answer your question.
Ron, to add on to that, UTC created a paper and round. You may have been involved in that with on OPGW, the life expectancy of OPGW.
Right.
So we have that available for our members. And if anyone on this call would like a copy of that, just email me or let John know, and we can send you a copy of that.
And Scott, quickly, the fiber cable is put on almost all those lines today when they're constructed new. It's very, very expensive to go back and retrofit it, but a lot of that is done as well.
Excellent. Thank you. That question was from Earl. Thank you, Earl, for that. Another question from Joe is, what skill sets must your technicians possess in the communications area?
Interesting. I happened to talk to some folks there today to see where they stand on that, because it's been 6 years and the job market has changed. The available help has changed a lot. I was told if, not exactly, but if you can breathe, come on in, we'll train you on whatever. But they sent me a list of the things they look for in wireless. And if you don't have it, they provide it. So DC power, basic electricity for non-electricians with a certification exam that must be passed. And then for safety, arc flash electrical safety, and they have to pass a certification exam on that. Then on legacy systems, they get a associate certified electronic technician, basic systems technician training, general communications 1, 2, and 3 training and certification. Even the wireless guys have to do networking, learn some networking, get their Cisco CCNT certification and CCNA certifications, because everything they touch, even in wireless, is network connected as well. But specialized stuff then would be line and antenna sweep training, sweeping lines and antennas and getting certified on that, and some microwave radio technician training and certification. And then beyond that, the wireless guys are taking advantage of some Motorola courses in basic radio, RF and radio professionals, basic networking, professional and customer radios, PCR. And then beyond that, I remember being there myself, it's constant training on new products that they have to maintain. So equipment specific training. And you asked, what do they look for? They look for any of that in incoming potential employees, but it's getting very difficult right now to find people that are totally ready to step in and start working.
Very good. Does UTC provide ongoing training for its members?
We do in different capacities. We customize training. We've worked with some utilities in the past to customize training to be taught or trained in-house. We have partnerships with other organizations such as the Light Brigade that provide training that under the UTC umbrella. Our education programs are built to provide training, ongoing training on different levels. At the annual conference, Monday is dedicated to training day. Tuesday, we have summits that are focused on key industry technical issues as well as the education. So yes, we do, but we do pride ourselves on being able to customize our training for our utility members that we can deliver in-house or virtually.
If I could add something to that, Scott,
Sure.
it was very beneficial to me as a utility member, as an engineer in UTC membership, that I was able to get some of the needed annual CEU credits through that program at the national meeting.
Excellent. So this is from Charles. He was asking, what do you think of Starlink and other alternatives to land mobile? He was a little surprised to hear that some of the many points needed for repeaters that conventional UHF was not used controlling the PLCs, and was also curious if that was a spectrum availability issue.
First part of the question, the Starlink system is, I've been following it. Technically, it's not well explained everywhere, but I've learned a little bit about it. I don't know that it's in a position to rely on for extremely high reliability, low latency relaying applications, protective relaying I was talking about on, or I might have talked about, it was in my mind to say it, on a 500 kV, 500,000 volt, 100-mile long line, you have to instantaneously have the two ends of the line communicating with each other. If there's a fault, they both say, yes, the fault is between us, open, and they open. But the open sequence involves opening a transpose, interpose relay, and then slamming open that huge breaker out in the yard that really is scary when you're close by and hear them go off. That whole cycle has to happen within 2 or 3 cycles of the 60 cycle waveform. So you're talking very, very low latency on terrestrial paths to do that. I know they brag it's a low latency system, but it's still not in the just a few milliseconds. I believe, I don't remember the numbers, but it seemed like we had to do everything on the communications side within 5 milliseconds or something. Somebody online here might fix that number, but very, very small number under the latency that they're bragging even from low Earth orbit satellites. And that's saying if the 100% reliability, it's always there when you need it. The power is always there, and as mentioned, and the need for protecting those lines never goes away either.
Yeah, and Scott, thank you for asking that question. And Charles, thank you. I met with, we just had our broadband workshop in Spokane. We met with Starlink there. They're actually speaking next week at one of our UTC conferences in New Hampshire to address that issue. Several of our utility members have the same type of inquiry to learn more. So we're just starting to peel back the skin on that onion around Starlink to see if there is compatibility and can meet our needs. But a great question. Thank you for that explanation, Ron. I appreciate it.
Sure. What was the rest of the question, Scott? The second half?
Yeah, he was asking just that he was surprised that the conventional UHF was not used for controlling PLCs, and was wondering if there was a spectrum issue, availability issue associated with that.
Oh yes, and indeed, what I mentioned before, most all that spectrum is totally utilized. It was very, very difficult, even out in the way out countryside, to license a fixed point-to-point UHF radio link when I was finished with the career. It could happen. You might have to move some people around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then because of the FCC, the federal use of the PLC frequency, when it's time to coordinate to minimize harmful interference, that can become a challenge too.
Excellent, thank you. Iggy's asking, and is appreciative of your extensive sharing of your knowledge. What are your thoughts on SCADA and cybersecurity, particularly regarding penetration and middleman attacks in the wireless segment between the remote field instrumentation and the control center?
You know, I can answer it quickly and then turn it over to Karnel, but I'm an old guy here and have been gone in the industry for a while, but even 6 years ago, that was one of the things I just couldn't get my head around. When a hacker can do just about anything they want, and of course on the TV shows, all you have to do is pull up a laptop and you shut down 1/4 of Las Vegas in 5 seconds or something. I knew that wasn't possible unless everything was interconnected and security wasn't absolutely watertight. And it scares me to set up the possibility there will be a hacker that can figure out how to do it. Those kids don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, and another great question. UTC has a committee devoted to cybersecurity that we collaborate with the industry. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. There's no right or wrong answer at this point in time. UTC is actually bringing on new staff resources to help to raise our level of contribution in that space. Because it's a big issue, and I know that utilities put in firewalls and other procedures to protect themselves against cyber attacks, but we've all heard about the gas pipeline that will be the ransom being held for ransom and things of that nature. A lot of work still needs to be done in that area, but a lot of thought, leadership, and brain power is being directed at and especially at UTC to help our members address the issue.
Very good. And appreciate everybody's putting questions in the chat room. If you have other questions, feel free to put them in there. And we do have a few more here. Ronald's asking, are large quasi-government utilities such as the TVA represented in UTC?
They are. TVA, BG&A, I'm thinking Bonneville Power Authority. Yes, they all are membership. UTC allows membership from all types of utility, electric, gas, water, cooperatives, municipalities, IOUs, are all members of UTC. As a matter of fact, chairman of our regional division is from TVA.
Excellent. Dennis asks, what professional opportunities are there for persons who might be interested in a career with UTC's frequency coordination service?
We're always looking for people who have an interest. Please, if you really are serious about pursuing that, I can put you in touch with our frequency coordinators and see what the opportunities are. The reason I'm saying that is because that's a skill set that a dying breed, for a lack of better words. With the new technologies and the way things are done, coordinators are a valued commodity, and we would love to talk to anyone who has an interest.
Very good. Charles also asks, are your training resources free?
No, some are. I should say my white papers are, but some training there is a price tag for it to enroll. But in the links and stuff, I have the information that I'll send that will be shared. And if there's any questions, they can contact me directly and we can talk about our resources and our training opportunities.
Okay. Question from Harry. If the electric utilities have their own fiber network for command and control, would the grid be immune to hackers?
Well, I don't know if you can ever say everything is totally immune, but my company had, the network was not connected to anything outside the company. That doesn't mean somebody couldn't accidentally slip a thumb drive into somewhere that they picked up out on the street, you know. Fiber optics, as far as a media that's difficult to break into to monitor what's going on, is probably one of the best ones, because you got to break it to get, well, not true. You can bend it and get a little bit of light out of it if you know what you're doing, but it's very difficult. It's not like wiretapping isn't as easy with fiber as it was with copper.
Well said.
Again, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A room, or the chat room, I'm sorry. A question from Charles again. In the province of Quebec, ice storm downed all power to 2.4 million for between weeks and months some time ago. What are your backup power requirements for member companies? You know, cities the size of Phoenix would have, you know, no power for a couple of months if the infrastructure had to be totally replaced.
Well, we don't worry about ice storms here, but there are windstorms take a lot of stuff down. As far as backups, everything in the Western United States anyway is on a big donut loop, and it takes advantage of the fact that in the summer in the Pacific Northwest doesn't need much power because it's cooler up there, and we need a lot of it down here for our air conditioning. So power flows down, well, mostly down to Los Angeles, Karnel, but some of it comes to Arizona.
Yeah.
But conversely, in the winter when it's freezing up there and their hydropower is all frozen over and they need heat, we have excess generation down here. It can ship it right back up. So those kinds of things are there. And in fact, it's a huge multi-ring system on the macro scale. Down here in the regional areas, it's still multiple rings. So generally, if any major lines go down, we don't we don't have too much in the way of outages, and then power can be rerouted through some of the smaller distribution rings and stuff and get people back fairly quickly. When you have something like the DC interconnect between down the west side of the big loop, DC interconnect coming from the Pacific Northwest down into California, that line seemed like that was the one the forest fire took it out, or they had to shut it down. Forest fire, and that caused some major havoc, but the loops handled a lot of it, and some curtailment handled the rest of it. But as far as major outages, I don't think there was generally a lot of big concern. I'd hate for an ice storm to take you out for months because it's cold. What do they? I hope they've got radiant heat or something. Hope that answered it.
How many 9s do you currently design your 11 gig paths for if you can't get 5?
Well, as many as you can get, but 4 and an 8 is good. 4 9s and an 8. 4 9s and a 7. I think I had one do that.
Where can we get information if someone's interested in joining UTC's frequency coordination staff? And what information should they be prepared with initially?
You can contact me directly, or Joanne Howell, who's the Vice President of Spectrum Services. You should be able to know the basic things: frequency propagation, be familiar with the Code of Federal Regulations regarding the allocation of spectrum, be able to navigate your way through a 600 form, know how to utilize the ULS system that the FCC provides, those kind of things. Have a familiarity with propagation models, interference, ways to suggest to minimize interference, whether it's down tilting or putting a filter or something online, those kind of questions along those lines.
All right. This is from David. Utilities typically do not compete. Does that fact make the reason UTC is such a strong player in the industry?
I would say yes, because we're not monopolies, but sometimes there's some overlap between service territory, between companies. I'm thinking AEP versus Florida Power Light or whatever, NextEra, what they're called now. But no, there's never direct competition head on. So I think that I have to agree with the statement. Yeah.
Okay. Are any plans being made for another Carrington event for both the grid and communications?
Is that the?
It'd be a large coronal mass ejection or some other solar storm related issue. Yes.
What little I understood of that, I saw when in my reading that it was most prevalent up in the East Coast, the northern part of the East Coast, and up into Canada, just due to the Earth's magnetic field and whatnot. There are, and I'm not an expert on that at all. I know people are mitigating those problems so that they don't have major issues. But when you have that kind of a magnetic field go across wires, you know how that's the principle that says current is going to flow. I think what generally was happening in those things, it wasn't burning out transformers like some people were saying. It was just a lot of current was in the ground leads, and the fault indicators relays were relaying out and stuff and saying that there's some kind of fault here. And so a lot of that can be mitigated with relay settings and so forth. It's an issue. It must have been exciting back in the telegraph days when they were talking after they disconnected the batteries, and they could still send telegraph messages. The lines were so charged up. But no, seriously, it could be an issue if it's not watched. It is more prevalent in locations other than, it's not as big an issue, I understand, down here in our part of the country.
All right. I have a couple of questions that are sort of related, and they deal with the electric vehicles and their impact on the grid, and will the continuous uptick in electrical vehicle usage require a total rebuild of the grid, and what effect might that have on some local infrastructure?
Something just happened to our screen. Are we still there?
Yeah, we're still here. Yeah, I think he just
Okay.
changed put up the
All right.
list I said.
I just started to share the links.
Okay. Yeah, electric vehicles will, initially, they haven't added a lot of loading to the networks from what I understood, because there's just not that many of them. If all of California is driving them in 2035, that's an issue for sure. And actually getting the energy to charge those vehicles is a huge deal. A lot of times, if you think about it, they talk about the grid, and I always think in terms of the grid of wires, but there's generation and there's load hanging all over those grids. And sometimes it was pointed out to me, and I didn't, as an electrical engineer, but I had to think about, oh yeah, that's right. If you have distributed generation around a grid, the whole grid doesn't necessarily have to carry all of this. All the power needed by all the load doesn't have to go down one piece of wire. It's all distributed. So I don't know about local changes other than just a lot more capacity in the generation and the lines. A lot of lines are built for more capacity than they need. At least in our system, they were mainly because the summer peaks were so high.
Right.
But we still had capacity to spare in the wire, if you will. Generation is where you get into the most trouble. At some point, there just isn't any to add to the issue. I think in California, they're doing some curtailment right now, even of charging electric cars because of the heat that's going on over there. So.
Yeah, and Ron, I have to say, living here in California and listening to the debate about not selling any gas-driven cars in California after whatever year, and trying to think that through in the application of it, it's going to take a lot of engineering to make that work on a consistent basis for a mass population. So I still think there's a lot to unpack on that idea in order for us to have a real intelligent answer.
Well, very good. I would encourage everybody to look at the Q&A or the chat room. There's a few other comments, follow-up comments that people have made, which are interesting and so forth. So take a look at that before we complete the call tonight, and see a few other things. I don't have any other questions in here. I had one of my own, and that was kind of dealing with some of the conversation you had initially. And I was wondering if the Internet of Things, the small cellular wireless devices are something that UTC has looked at using or deploying for any of the command and control functions.
I would say we.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ron, I'm sorry.
Well, there was talk of it when I retired, and I haven't really paid much attention to it. Karnel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Ron. There's been some chatter about it, but nothing that I've seen recently. One other point I did want to bring forward, that when the question was asked about challenges for wireless, 6 gigahertz, it's a big issue. It's a big issue across the board. That's something that I know UTC is passionately pursuing on behalf of our members. But that's one of the wireless issues that are on the table now that I think is going to have an impact on the industry as a whole.
And what he's referring to there is the shared use of that spectrum for unlicensed, very, very broadband and Wi-Fi issues that are coming out there. I forgot the term for that new system, but it's supposed to share quietly with our 6 gigahertz microwave frequencies, but they're already seeing interference from them.
Yeah.
One last thing popped in here, and I want to make sure. There was a question a little bit ago about PLCs and how they're controlled, and whether the PLC control over let me make sure I get it correct here. Controlling via PLC control and communications via power lines. Is there any? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about it. and there's still a lot of that in service, but there's a lot of utilities backing away from it. And what that amounts to is impressing a very low frequency carrier on the power line itself, transporting it 150 miles and taking it back off. It was a real reliable way to do protective relaying. Even if the line fell down, it would still talk through it. But the maintenance on all those things is unbelievable. And the traps you have to put on the end of the line to pass the 60 hertz and block the 130 or 220 hertz, kilohertz signals. Those traps are enormous, and they are a fixed diameter of wire. And so you've funneled your current carrying capability down to whatever the wire size is in those traps. And so my company stopped using it, got clear out of it, and just went with 2 microwave paths, or 1 microwave, 1 fiber, or one microwave of ours and 1 microwave of somebody else's.
So Scott, I think you're done with the questions. Is that right?
I am. Thank you, everybody, for putting those in there. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I got one last question for you two, and it's a pretty easy one. What is the main technology event for UTC next year? When and where is that? In case any of our members want to attend.
Yeah, it's UTC Telecom and Technology 2023, and will be held in Fort Lauderdale, June 5th through the 9th.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. We had a great set of questions. We got to know another industry pretty intimately, which is great. I want to remind everybody about our November event in Atlanta on the 19th. And we have some fun stuff scheduled for Friday as well. Hopefully we'll see many of you there. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.